right. Good afternoon, class. Hope everybody had a good weekend. So as usual, we're going to start with announcements. This week's assignments have been posted on Blackboard, and the weekly quiz and the journal entry are both due Sunday, January 30th before midnight. So the journal prompt is really asking a lot for your opinion. And I wanted to explain to you that the reason we're doing these is to give you a time and an assignment that makes you practice your writing skills and do some critical thinking. So I'm very, very generous with the grading on the journal prompts. Most people get full credit on all of them. You really have to only write 1 or 2 sentences to get partial credit or no credit. There's also a video I want you to watch on Blackboard, and you'll need to watch it before you take the quiz, because the quiz is going to include some stuff from that video. And we're coming up on the first food giveaway of the semester. I posted this on Blackboard as well, so you can find the link on Blackboard. 4 times a semester on each campus, there's a farmer's market style food giveaway. Largely fruits and vegetables, fresh stuff. Right now, it's only open to faculty, students, and staff. And you have to register, but the reason you're registering is just to say, so they know how much food to provide, how much food to bring to campus to give away. It's good stuff. Last time we met, there was a question right at the end about are not and are effective. So let's go through the difference between these 2 different numbers. So are not is kind of a hypothetical. It's used to compare transmission rates between different diseases. So you can compare COVID to flu or measles or smallpox or plague. And the R naught is the number of people who can be infected by one contagious person in what we call a virgin population. This means that population has not been exposed to the disease before and is not vaccinated against the disease. So everybody in the population is susceptible. So there's no pre-existing immunity. R naught, we could see this at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, when it was a brand new disease spreading throughout the world. We could, calculate an R naught. Now we're having to use R effective or RE. And that's the rate of disease spread in real world situations. So this is going to be in a population that has some immunity. Either they've seen the disease before, and so some people have immunity from being exposed, or they're vaccinated. And so the R effective varies at different times. It depends on the population, how much they've been exposed, how recently they've been exposed, how high the vaccination rate is, things like population mixing. If people interact a lot and get in crowded conditions, that's going to have a higher R effective than if you live in, I don't know, Wyoming, and it's the middle of winter and you don't go anywhere except the grocery store and the farm stand, that kind of thing. When we're talking about R, where is my mouse? When we're talking about R effective, an R effective over 1 means that things are getting worse. The disease is spreading and more people are getting infected. If the R effective is less than 1, the disease is kind of slowing down, and you're going to, while new people are still getting infected, you're going to have a decrease in the percent of the population that's infected. So if you've got a population of 100 people, you start out with 10 people infected this week, and next week there's an additional couple of people, there's 12 new infections. You've got a higher percentage of the population getting infected. The R effective is more than 1. If you take that same population, and this week you've got 10 people infected, and next week you have 8 new infections, the percent of the population infected is going down, and the R effective is less than 1. Does that clarify the difference there for you guys? Nate, go ahead.
So in terms of the R naught, do they use like predictions as those, like to compare with real data? Or is it more of something that they use as like a hypothetical comparison tool? I don't know if that's, if you're understanding the question I'm asking. If are they actively using data that they predicted to gauge spread and of disease with the actual R effective numbers?
The R effective is, let me think how to rephrase this. The R effective is practical on the ground with a disease that has existed for a while. The R naught is there's a complicated calculations that go into R naught, but it is a hypothetical number, and it's not used. I mean, it could be used to predict spread of a disease that comes into a virgin population. So in the US, we've eradicated measles in this country. It's not endemic here, but periodically somebody from another part of the world brings measles into the US. And if you've got a population that's not vaccinated, that's when we need the R naught to predict how many people are going to be infected, how fast is it going to spread, and get an idea of just how bad it's going to be. Does that clear that up for you?
Yeah, a little bit. Makes more sense. I think it's more of like a test scenario, and the data probably wouldn't be comparative now, but maybe when COVID first outbreak, then maybe they could use that. Is that, am I getting what you're putting down there?
Yep, you're getting there.
Thanks.
Yep. It really is comparing different diseases. All right. So, what is COVID? We think of it as a respiratory infection. These are x-rays of one patient when they were experiencing COVID and when they've recovered. So let me give you directions around this X-ray. Down through the back, this is the spinal cord. This gray shadow here is the heart. There's a little bit on this side. This big white looking area, that's the liver. These are ribs. These little circles, those are probably EKG stickers. You know, if they take an electrocardiogram, they put a sticker on you. That's what you're seeing right here. This space between the ribs should be pretty uniform in color. All of this white stuff that you're seeing in here is a sign of infection or scar tissue. So it's a sign that there's something in the lungs other than air. And you can still see some of this damage. This is probably going to be long-term damage for this patient. Really, the lung space should look more like it does out here at the edges. Now, we think about COVID as a respiratory infection, but it's really systemic. So it can affect all parts of the body. It just infects through the respiratory system. So that's how we catch the disease, but it goes throughout the body. We think of the symptoms: coughing, fever, shortness of breath, loss of taste and or smell. That's one that's unusual. It's pretty specific to COVID. If you lose your sense of smell, that is a sign that you've got this disease. But what COVID is really doing is it is causing clotting. So most of the damage to the body is due to clot formations in blood vessels. And that's why pre-existing conditions that have nothing to do with the lungs can be made worse due to COVID. Because if you got a blood clot in a blood vessel, wherever it is in the body, you're going to have some problems. If it's in the head, you can have a stroke. If it's near the heart, you can have a heart attack, triggered by these microclots, these tiny little clots. This lung damage also reduces the amount of oxygen in the blood supply. And that's going to make you feel fatigued. If you really aren't getting enough oxygen, that can cause tissues to die in various parts of the body. So we can see that between the lung damage and the clots in the blood vessels, you're cutting off the oxygen supply to various organs. So we can have lots and lots of different issues. We know that it also, oh, Nate, you got your hand up again?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on that. I'm actually experiencing it now. I had COVID like 2 weeks ago. I really didn't notice it at first. I had like a mild, like scratchy throat, mild, like runny nose. I had an antigen test sitting at home. I'm like, you know what? Might as well take it. Boom, positive. Next day, fever, lightheaded. And it was funny. Like right after I found out I was positive, then it hit me. But, you know, I'm vaccinated, young. I do have asthma. So that was something I was worried about. The first 2 days were like the worst, but I still have like lingering asthma exacerbations. So that could be that post-viral.
Yes.
Or so. But yeah, I just thought it was interesting because I was being seen today getting chest x-rays done. So.
Oh, yes. So this is really timely for you. We're going to talk about post-viral a little later in the semester, but we do know that COVID is a causes long-lasting effects in the body. We're calling it long COVID, and something like 5% of people who get COVID have effects that last for months. Sorry, Nate.
It's nothing like life-threatening. Like I've always had asthma, but I've noticed like I got an increased like nebulizer usage and stuff like that. So definitely ain't good. But it's nothing like, oh my
Same
God.
here. I have asthma and I use my nebulizer all the time now.
Yeah. Oof. Well, I'm sorry you guys have had to deal with that. A lot of us have, unfortunately.
Just one more thing, Professor. My laptop's actually about to die, so I'll rejoin via phone. I've left the charger at work. Just want to let you know. Okay,
no problem. We know that COVID is also, well, we were just talking about long COVID, the shortness of breath, lingering cough, but also things like extreme fatigue and brain fog have been lasting for long periods of time after COVID. We don't know how long COVID is going to last in patients. We just don't know. There are some people who got infected in the first wave who still have symptoms. And if you had blood clots that caused damage to your kidneys, your liver, your brain, those are going to be permanent effects. So it's not something to mess around with. And even mild cases can cause long COVID. We also know we're in a pandemic. This is affecting everybody's mental health as well. People who have it, family members, people in the medical field, those people are seriously affected by it because they see it constantly. And it's really, things have been really, really hard for people in the medical profession. So we're seeing increases in things like post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, difficulty concentrating, lower productivity, all of these things that come with really high stress levels. Now, the origin of COVID, I think we all kind of know this one. We know it originated in China. And the evidence is piling up that what happened originally was that somebody in the Wuhan district got exposed to a bat that had a coronavirus, and that coronavirus moved into the person, probably went through a bunch of mutations, probably got passed from person to person without being so severe at first, and then kind of exploded into the population. Viruses have very, very, very high rates of evolution, especially viruses that have RNA for their genetic material, like COVID. When RNA is being copied to make new viruses, new individual viruses, the enzyme that does that has a very, very high error rate. It makes a lot of mistakes, which means that a lot of viruses being produced have genetic mutations. Now, viruses can get away with this because when a virus reproduces in your cell, it's producing hundreds of thousands or millions of new viruses. So if you're producing 100,000 new viruses and 20,000 of them are defective because of genetic mutations, that's still a hell of a lot of virus that can go on to spread other cells, or you can spread to other people. And here comes Nate again. And some of these mutations will be harmless, some will be bad. They can increase transmission of the virus like the Omicron one did. They can increase the ability to evade the host immune system, which is something we're all kind of worried about. Host, of course, is the person who is infected. And Nate.
So I just I had a question in regards to viruses and mutation. Is that part of the reason why there hasn't been a vaccine that, like the other vaccines that prevent infection? Is it because of how much the virus mutates? Is that part of the science behind it? And I'm talking about like in terms of like the measles vaccine, polio, smallpox, ones that like completely eradicated those viruses.
Right. When we talk about vaccines and the immune system, it's more complicated than just the rate of mutation. A high rate of mutation certainly does allow a virus to escape the immune systems that's learned how to attack it from vaccines.
Right.
But there's also characteristics of the virus that make it more resistant to an immune response. And genetic mutations can increase that, but there can also be just some basic kind of background resistance to immune response there.
Okay, just like that's in its genetic instruction based off the RNA. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, they just have genes that for whatever reason allow them to
evade immunity.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, thank you for that.
You're welcome. All right, so when we talk about new diseases coming into the human species, they generally come from mammals. We're mammals. We're more likely to be infected by a disease that can infect other mammals. And we tend to hear about them coming into us from bats and from rodents. And a lot of people say, oh, we should kill all the bats. Oh no, oh no. Yeah, well, no. One of the reasons, there are two reasons that most of these diseases come from bats and rodents. One is that most mammals are bats or rodents. 1 out of every 4 mammal species is a bat, and 1 out of every 2 mammal species is a rodent. So we're not likely to get diseases coming out of goats because there aren't as many species of goats. The other thing is bats and rodents, there's a ton of them. Whether or not you want to know this, pretty much every house around the world has mice. You're pretty much guaranteed that there's at least a couple of mice living in your walls. Bats are everywhere. There are billions of bats on the planet. It's the same kind of thing. And so it's just getting exposed to these guys that allows diseases to spread from them into us. I mentioned we've got a good idea of COVID transmission now. It is spread through respiration. There, especially early in the pandemic, people were worried about touching surfaces, fecal transmission, fecal oral transmission. There's really no evidence of either of those. Certainly, there are lots of diseases we can pick up by touching a surface and then eating a sandwich with our bare hands or picking our nose, touching our eyes, this sort of stuff. Washing your hands really helps with that. If you've been out in public and you've touched things, you wash your hands before you eat or touch your face. Soap and water does the job fine. We don't need alcohol hand sanitizers. They actually don't work as well as soap and water. Soap and water gets 90, most germs off your hands. We also know now that transmission tends to occur outside. I'm sorry, inside, not outside. Outside is much, much safer. If we are indoors, good ventilation really reduces the risk. Now, you guys go to a community college. Do you think the building has good ventilation? I can tell you right now that the buildings at North Shore do not have good ventilation. They're all old. They all need to be refurbished. This is the case with lots of indoor spaces. Nate, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I wouldn't even know. The 2 years I've been going to NSCC, it's been all online. The only time I went on campus was to like pick up a book. So you know more than me on that for sure.
Yeah. Jerry, did you want to add something?
I was just backing his sentiment that I've never even been there for class ever.
Okay. Yeah, it's been going on for a while, hasn't it? Yeah, I can tell you that the ventilation system doesn't work very well in most of the buildings there. When in the winter, we're seeing a lot of restaurants and stuff doing temporary outdoor structures. So people can dine outside, but still be in shelter. Yeah, that's no difference than being inside. In fact, it's probably worse because you don't have any kind of ventilation going on there. You don't have airflow going through the space. The respiratory droplets that carry COVID tend to be larger in size. Some diseases can spread on little tiny drops. The common cold, the measles, these can spread long distances. COVID, once you get to be 6 feet away, there's very little left in the air and you're not likely to be exposed. So 6 feet away helps. Wearing any kind of mask helps. Obviously, N95s are the best. Surgical masks are kind of a second rate. Cloth masks, least effective, but any kind of mask will help. It can take between 2 days and 2 weeks from exposure until a person is symptomatic. And for part of that time, you can be contagious. So you can be spreading it to other people. Hence, we should all be wearing masks. We don't want this to keep going forever. And Nate, again, go ahead.
Sorry, I've got so many questions, but this is really interesting stuff to me. Oh gosh, and of course I forget I forget what I was gonna say. How did they because I remember early in the pandemic, there was like a big, with cleaning surfaces and people were wondering like how long the virus could stay on surfaces. Is that something they just tested on like a petri dish or they just observed it on like natural environments? Oh, and I did remember the second part to my question, but I'll let you finish.
Okay. Yeah, that's something that they can easily test in a laboratory setting by putting some of the virus on a surface and then swabbing it up and seeing if there's any active virus there. Different viruses have different rates of survivalship on surface.
Yeah, I've seen that too.
HIV, for example, if you spilled HIV-infected blood droplets on a desk, by the time the blood dried, it would not be infective anymore. It's very, very weak virus outside of the human body. Flu, measles, these are going to last longer. And so those are the kinds of things that we really worry about, touching surfaces and then getting, touching your face and getting infected.
Here was the second part. This one's a little more important. Now and I asked this because the guidance from the CDC, they've kind of flip-flopped on it.
Yeah,
And
it's
I'm
crappy.
it's confusing to say the least, but in the period of infectiousness and how that coincides with negative tests,
Yeah.
is it possible that someone could test negative and still have a viral load that they could spread, or is
Oh,
it different person to
Nate.
person?
Your question goes right to the next little section in my notes. Good job. It's exactly what I was going to talk about next.
All right, well then I'll let you do it as you were going to do it. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. So, a negative test says that you do not have enough virus in your nose to be detected at the time the test was administered. That's what it says. Different types of tests have different levels of sensitivity. So the one where they stick the thing way up in your nose and do a PCR test is much more sensitive than the home test kits. The home test kits are less sensitive. I've heard that if you do a throat swab, that is more sensitive for the home test than a nasal swab. But I don't know about you. I can't do a throat swab on myself.
The nasal swab is the PCR.
If you get it done somewhere else, a lot of home tests are a nasal swab as well.
Yeah, mine was an antigen at home and it was a nasal swab too. But I think those PCR ones are way more in depth. I think they test different metrics in terms of the virus. I'm not sure. I don't know about this, but I know that they have a heightened accuracy.
Yes, the PCR tests are kind of the gold standard here.
So
Yeah.
I'm trying to differentiate what you guys are saying. The home test and the PCR, they're two different style tests. They both go in your nose, right?
Yes.
So what's the difference? I'm trying to understand. Please.
Okay. The home tests, what they are measuring the amount of virus in your nose from a swab, but it's called an antigen test. So there are proteins called antigens in the test solution, and they will attach to virus particles.
Oh, okay.
And then the test can detect the antigen binding, the antigens that
really makes a lot of sense, though. I'm so serious.
Yeah. The PCR test has to go to a lab, and they take the sample, and it can still be from your nose. But what they do is they're looking for viral genes from the virus. And PCR, what that does is if there's one tiny little strand of DNA or RNA in this case, in the sample, it makes multiple copies. And so PCR, we say it amplifies the signal. So it makes a lot more of those genes to make it easier to see them.
That was a great explanation. So I think I had the Omicron over break, but I got a PCR. I got two, and they were both negative.
Yeah.
I mean, I was shivering. I can smell and taste, but it was like hard and fast, kind of.
Yeah.
And like a bunch of people I knew had the same issue in the same time period, like the end of December, beginning of January, kind of hit a bunch of people with the same thing. So I was wondering, is the Omicron harder to detect, or what the deal is?
Yes, it is.
Okay,
Yes, it
cool.
is. And the flu's going around.
Yes. I was just gonna say that people are forgetting about that a lot.
Yeah.
So,
People tend to underestimate the flu. We tend to go, we get a really bad cold and we go, oh, it's the flu. I'm not feeling good. I'm really sick. But the flu is fevers and chills and muscle aches and an average of 50,000 dead in the United States every winter. So it is a nasty, nasty virus. Okay, and yes, it's not as effective against Omicron. And the at-home tests are not as effective at detecting it. So you could still be infected. You could still spread the virus. Right now, this may be wrong. The government is going to be mailing out COVID tests. I don't understand the way they're doing this, but you have to sign up. And the original website was covidtest.gov, but then they decided to do it through the US Postal Service. So you may have to go to the Postal Service website and find that.
I used the link you put in Blackboard and it worked.
Okay, good.
That was the Postal Service one.
Yep. So sign up, get your tests, even if you don't need them right now, keep them for if you need them in the future.
So are these home tests or are these PCRs?
Those are home tests.
Okay.
So yeah, they're not as good, but it's still better than nothing.
Sure.
and I think they come with 2 tests too. I don't know if this is the one I got. I don't know if these are the ones they're sending out, but it comes with, like, you take one test and then you take like another one 5 days later. I don't know if that's the standard for all the antigen tests, but that was the one in this one I've had for a while.
Yeah, it's highly variable. And if you're buying them, I don't recommend getting them through Amazon. There are counterfeit tests out there, and Amazon is not good at screening out counterfeit material. They don't care. They just want to sell it. So if you're buying a test kit, buy it from a drugstore. Less likely to be counterfeit that way. All right. We know that we are in the middle of an Omicron surge. It is starting to decline in lots of places in the country. This is a county by county map that shows the rate of cases per capita. Per capita means for a specific number of people in the population. So per 100,000 people or per 10,000 people. That's important because otherwise all you would see is you'd see New York lit up like crazy. You'd see Los Angeles lit up like crazy. You'd see Chicago, Miami, you know, the big towns would be lit up like crazy because those are the places that are going to have the most number of infected people. When you do it per capita, you can see that there's some counties in Wyoming that have it really, really bad as of January 15th. Lots of places in Alaska that have it really, really bad on a per capita basis.
So it's from this map, it's striking to me that Alaska is so maroon, you know, say like Maine. I would think Alaska is as least traveled as Maine is, but no, it's not.
Yeah, it
Well, doesn't Alaska have a lot of native? I don't know how to like. Are they Native American? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Indigenous people.
Yeah,
Engines.
like they live off of the land. So would they like? Is that why maybe like they don't have access to the vaccines or something like that?
that's a really good point. Alaska it's very hard to get around, and access is definitely going to be an issue everywhere in Alaska outside of like Anchorage, Alaska. So that's going to be part of it. Indigenous communities often have fewer resources, so they don't have the money to buy vaccines for their community, even though the vaccines are supposed to be free from the federal government. Alaska also has a very strong libertarian streak. So they don't like the government telling them what to do. They have a very strong attitude of, I can do everything. And, in a lot of Alaska, you have to be able to do everything to survive. So there's some of that going on there as well. I mean, if we look at this area, this is called the Four Corners area. These purple areas and dark orange areas, a lot of native or indigenous communities are there. But we can also look at this area of the California coast, which has a lot of indigenous communities, and they're not as bad off. So it's not just that. But that definitely can impact things. Absolutely. Now, my notes on this one. Because the tests are not highly accurate, because people are taking the tests at home. If you take the test at home, you're not reporting it to the government. So all of these numbers are definitely underestimated. And it can be really hard to figure out the changes going on. So how do we know how much transmission is going on? Any ideas? Any thoughts?
I had a question, but I will give you a solution how it's transmit. I would say, loosened restrictions, sporting events, things of that nature. But I also want to ask about people who are asymptomatic and transmission, and whether or not there is a definitive link that asymptomatic people either don't transmit the virus or barely transmit it, or B, can asymptomatic people spread the virus just as much as me or someone else that has symptoms?
Asymptomatic people can spread the virus, not as much as people who are highly symptomatic.
Just due to the amount of expel, cough, respiration from being symptomatic. Would you say that's fair?
That's part of it, but it's also that asymptomatic people have a lower viral load. They have less virus in their body. So if I'm asymptomatic and I'm breathing on you, I'm breathing out less virus than somebody who is symptomatic and very sick.
That makes sense. Thank you.
And this is one of those things that's puzzling to people who don't study it, but the amount of virus that you get exposed to is going to impact whether or not you have symptoms. So if you get exposed to a very, very little virus, even if it's something new, you're significantly less likely to have the disease, because your immune system sees the virus particles, recognizes them, and destroys them. And if there's only like 5 virus particles, your immune system can take it out. But if you get exposed to 500, then there's a higher likelihood that your immune system won't be able to wipe it out before it gets into your cells and starts reproducing. Okay. So looking at sporting events and public gatherings and restrictions, that's not a good way. Those are what I would call downstream of the infection rate. So the infection rate should determine the regulations the government is putting out there. So if we're looking at trying to figure out what's going on, we can look at hospitalizations. Hospitalizations go up, that's a sign that COVID is going up in the community. But we can also look at sewage monitoring. So this is not widespread in the US, but Boston and New York are both monitoring the amount of virus in the sewage system.
Is that just in terms of like black water? Like they're just sampling it?
Yeah, they're sampling the wastewater that goes into the, before it goes through the purification process and sewage treatment plants. Yep. They're looking at that. They're monitoring how much virus is in there. And so you shed virus through your waste products, and most people in most communities send their waste products into the sewage system. So it's a good way to get a trend. It's not going to tell you how many people are infected, but you can follow the trend. And Boston and New York are both showing declining amounts of virus in the sewage system. Now, it takes 2 weeks for hospitalizations and deaths to change in response to changes in infection in the community. So we've got cases declining. We should expect to see hospitalizations and deaths starting to go down 2 weeks later. Okay. So we kind of talked about this already. I like this graphic because when we think about reducing our risks, we very often think about doing one thing. We get vaccinated. Well, every way that we reduce disease transmission has problems. We know that a lot of people are getting infected, even though they've been vaccinated. You're still getting infected by Omicron. So there are holes in that layer of protection. Quarantining, there are problems with that. A lot of people can't do that for various reasons. They have to go to work. They have to go out and get food. Ventilation is really important with COVID, but it's not perfect. Hand hygiene helps. Masking helps. All of these things, though, do allow some level of transmission. But what happens is the likelihood that a virus gets through each one of these levels goes down the more methods you use to reduce your risk. So if you just do physical distancing, you've got some risk going. If you do that plus masks, your risk goes down. If you do that and avoid touching your face, your risk goes down. If you don't stay in crowded conditions for very long, your risk goes down. And these layers just kind of build on each other. So the more you can do, the better. How many of you guys have heard about things that can boost your immune system and protect you from COVID? No?
I'm the only thing. Go ahead. Sorry, I've talked plenty today.
Oh, no, you can go ahead. It's fine.
I was gonna say, I don't know if it'd be like a booster, but I know like monoclonal antibodies are used after infection. I don't know if that's something that could be incorporated. Yeah, I didn't think so.
That's a treatment. I'm talking about things like high doses of vitamin C. Have you heard that that helps prevent disease?
No, I haven't heard that at all.
Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna say that.
But you said COVID. I was just saying generally for your immune system, vitamin C, not particularly for COVID.
Yeah. So I've got two bits of bad news here. One is high doses of vitamin C do nothing for your immune system. And the other is that high doses of vitamin C increase the likelihood that you're going to get kidney stones. So let's not try and take vitamin supplements. There's no magic formula that can improve your immune system. Plus, you don't really want your immune system working harder than normal because that's when you start getting autoimmune diseases. And Nate has his hand up again.
Okay, I did think of something, but this isn't just really for COVID, but I guess general well-being, a balanced diet, exercise, weight mitigation. I mean, we're in America, so I know, I mean, that goes without saying, but I think diet, exercise, and just washing your hands, those are the biggest, I think, that everyone can do, and wearing a mask, obviously.
Yeah, those do help. I would say not everybody can do that. There are places in the US where it's very, very hard to get fresh produce. And a lot of people are impoverished and it's expensive to buy healthy food. And if we're talking about, for example, single mothers who are working, they might not have the time to exercise. So it sounds easy. Oh, we just eat healthy and exercise, and it's great if you can, but not everybody can.
I agree with that on the food part. I think that's fair. But I mean, even walking, light aerobic exercise, fixing, well, actually posture, that's something everyone should work on, me especially. But I think even like light walking and like small steps go like a long way.
Yeah.
And this is coming from someone who used to be like 280 pounds. So
Yeah.
I can definitely speak on that.
Yeah, that's the good thing about exercise and healthy eating. A little bit helps. You don't have to do a lot. But yeah, it can be tricky for some people. Covered all of that. What's next? There will be another variant. What's it going to be like? Nobody knows. Where will it come from? Nobody knows. Not very many countries do genomic surveying. They don't look at a large number of infections and say, oh, this is not Omicron, this is something new. And countries that do report new strains often get punished with travel bans. This happened with Omicron. South Africa reported it. They were doing a great job of surveying for new variants. But then Europe and the US says, oh, our citizens can't travel to Africa. Well, a lot of countries in Africa depend on tourist dollars from Europe and America. And so that really hurt the economy. Are they likely to report another new variant if they find one? Probably not. Probably not. We do know that the more people who are actively infected with a disease, the more opportunities there are for a new strain to evolve. So allowing COVID to kind of run rampant increases the likelihood that there's going to be another strain. And it could be worse. It could be milder. We don't know. Will the vaccine work against it? We don't know. There's a lot of questions there. I want to go to the whiteboard for a second, because there are people who are saying we're all going to get infected with COVID at some point. We might as well just go ahead and get infected. There's several problems with that. One of which is if we all get infected at the same time, the healthcare system fails and can't keep up with all the sick people. That's a big one. Another one is the more people infected at any given time, the more likely a new strain will evolve. That's a big problem. And they're saying that we're going to have to learn to live with it. It's going to become endemic. Endemic basically means constantly circulating in a population. So the flu is endemic. It's constantly floating around. We have outbreaks periodically. It kills, like I said, 50,000 Americans every winter on average. Do we want COVID to have, do we want to keep having these surges that kill hundreds of thousands of people? Yeah, I don't. I'm not looking forward to that. Endemic does not mean mild. And we talk about Omicron as mild, but that's only in comparison to the Delta strain. Delta was very, very deadly. Omicron isn't killing as many people, but it's still killing a lot. To give you some examples, malaria. Malaria is endemic in large parts of the world. And in 2020, worldwide, there were 600,000 deaths. Tuberculosis, oh boy, TB, tuberculosis. How do I spell tuberculosis? I can't remember how to spell that, so I'm just going to go TB. In 2021, there were 1.5 million deaths. Okay, and Nate comes to the rescue with the spelling. Thank you, Nate.
Do kids still get TB shots? I remember that little bubble. Maybe because I worked at Brigham and Women's Hospital. Maybe I had to get it because of that. Because my kids never got. I don't recall them getting it. I don't know.
There's not a good vaccine for TB, but there's the test, which you might be thinking about that, where they put it on your skin and then they look for a swelling,
Yeah.
or that kind of thing. They generally are doing that only if there is a likelihood that somebody's been exposed, or if you are working in a hospital setting.
That's why.
Or if you work at a zoo and you work with primates, because you can have tuberculosis that is asymptomatic for years and be able to give it to people who are whose immune systems are not functioning normally.
Isn't there a lot of treatments for tuberculosis these days? Like, it's not as fatal as it was like 1890s.
Yes, but a lot of the treatments are starting to, a lot of TB is starting to be resistant to treatment. A lot of the treatments aren't working anymore.
I swear I get like a new worry every class. Thank you. I'm just kidding.
Oh, and we're just getting started.
So has it mostly been eradicated from the US? Because I don't really hear about too many TB cases.
We don't have as many as some parts of the world, but it still occurs, especially, I see somebody put it in the chat, especially in homeless populations. It's pretty common in places where a lot of people are who have immune systems that aren't functioning as well. So healthcare and nursing homes. So yeah, it's still around. Just because, middle-class people don't get it doesn't mean it's not here. All right, so the last thing I want to talk about is the article I posted for you guys to read. The murky connection between coronavirus and climate change. I hope somebody read it. Is there anything anybody wants to talk about from the article?
I think the first suggestion that people said what corona came from, I remember seeing a picture of a bat. Mm-hmm. So when I was reading the article, I was like, wow, I guess that was kind of true. And then, so after I read the article, I watched something on YouTube about how some African countries, they're doing the same thing. They're just eating these animals that we shouldn't be eating. And it's cross-contaminating species and things, and our bodies are not built to deal with those pathogens.
Yes.
That's how HIV started. It was this virus in monkeys called SIV. And I
Well,
don't know if he ate
I
it
heard-
or
I
infected
was
with it.
seeing that they was using the kidneys from monkeys, the cultures from the kidneys from monkeys to help with polio. So the first where they was working on a polio vaccine is the same area where the first cases of HIV were.
I heard
Yeah.
when I heard that HIV, it like really was local for a long time in this rural part of Africa. I forget the country.
Congo?
Really exploded in the 80s.
We're going to talk about that.
I think it was due to the
You
sex
gotta pause
trade.
this. All right, well, let's pause this, Nate. We'll reconvene on this.
Yeah.
Because I feel like polio brought on AIDS, but because they weren't vetting the animals. They were just doing whatever they wanted, and they was injecting the locals with it, and they weren't even testing the animals that they were using.
Yeah,
So
that
nonetheless,
was,
we're reconvene.
yeah, we'll talk about how that really got started and all of that stuff. Yes. But yes, anytime you have people who are eating wild animals, there is an increased risk of getting exposed to a new disease. And yeah, we talk about Africans eating bushmeat, and we talk about the Asian wet markets. There are people in the US who eat bushmeat. Have you ever eaten venison? People hunt turkeys, rabbits.
Roadkill.
Not so many people eat roadkill, fortunately. Certainly, if we were eating bats, that would be more likely to spread something to us. But yeah. Bushmeat is a worldwide sort of thing. We just tend to think about it in less developed countries. It does tend to make up a bigger part of the diet. It tends to be a more important source of protein for those communities. And as we'll see, climate change does have an effect on the likelihood of a pandemic outbreak. So it's not a one-to-one. It's like we can say climate change increases the rate of hurricanes, but we can't say this hurricane was caused by climate change. Climate change is going to increase the exposure of humans to animal viruses, but we can't say this particular instance was due to climate change. So I hope you guys enjoyed that reading. It was, I found that one pretty interesting.
Yeah, so like deforestation is a part of the problem as well. These are elements I never considered. You know, we're taking these people's homes, these animals' homes. We're taking their homes, so they're going to invade our homes. And, you know, and what do they say? Every bat has 2.5 different species, versions of corona in them. Every single bat on average.
Yeah.
And the coronavirus, we've had different versions of the coronavirus. I didn't know any of this. It was a very informative article. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Somebody in their intro survey was asking about predictions of future pandemics. So this pandemic was predicted. Epidemiologists in 2019 did it's called a tabletop exercise, where a whole bunch of people got together and talked about what we could do if another coronavirus broke out from animals and started spreading into humans. Nate.
Didn't Bill Gates didn't they just donate $300 million to this next world issue? Did you see the article?
I didn't see that one.
Yeah.
Sorry to interject.
ahead.
It's funny that you mentioned that, Professor, because I was reading this. I believe it was John Hopkins University. They were the ones that played a big role in the exercise. So pretty much it was just a grand simulation of a pandemic, and the responses. I'll admit the timing was kind of sketchy, but I mean, at least they had some preparation.
Yeah, it didn't really work that much. The reason they picked a coronavirus is because we had 2 coronavirus outbreaks that caused small epidemics. The MERS and SARS epidemics had come, both of them out of the Southeast Asia area, both of them probably due to bad exposure. So it was pretty easy to predict that there was, class is almost over, yes. It was pretty easy to predict that this would happen again. Yeah. Yeah, class ends in 2 minutes.
I have one last question.
Yep.
And this is a good one. In terms of the origin of the virus, do you give any credit to the lab leak theory, or do you think it's plausible in any means? And if so, why or why not?
Is it, well, it depends on which lab leak theory.
The Wuhan virology lab.
Right. It is possible that somebody got infected in the lab as the first human case. It is not likely. While China's pretty secretive, there have been Western researchers who worked at that clinic, and none of them reported them the researchers handling bats or freshly collected virus from bats. Plus, just a few months ago, they reported a strain of virus that was found in wild bats in the Wuhan area that is very, very genetically similar to the original COVID variant.
And I just wanted to explain why I asked about it. I know, again, I know that there was research done on bat-borne coronaviruses in that laboratory. So that's why I don't discredit it, but I think we'll find more in the coming months. I give it 50-50. This is just me. I'm not an epidemiologist. I do think it's very plausible, just given the circumstances and the gain of function. Well, they changed the definition, so it's not gain of function, but the type of research they were doing there, it makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but if you ask epidemiologists and virologists, they're somewhere between 95 and 97% confident it came from the wet market or some other direct exposure between wild bats and a person.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And we'll talk about that. And we'll talk about gain of function stuff, largely when we talk about bioterrorism. All right. And we are going to be constantly comparing the diseases that we're talking about back to COVID. So you're going to learn more about COVID as the semester goes on. But we are out of time. So if there isn't any last minute questions, I will see everyone on Thursday.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Professor. It was a
Professor.
great class.
Professor.
Bye.
Thank you.